They burned down her bakery and called her a witch. "You're my angel," whispered the mountain man. "Burn the witch's den to the ground." The cry split the night as flames devoured the little bakery on Main Street. Cordelia Cora Moon Whisper, a plump 28-year-old baker, stumbled down the stairs barefoot, smoke stinging her eyes. Outside, a mob raged. Torches waved, stones flew, and at their head stood Ezekiel Thornfield, the fiery preacher who had roused the town into frenzy. "She poisoned our bread with her devil's herbs," he thundered. "It's true," shrieked Prudence Blackwood, clutching her son. "He grew ill after tasting her cakes." Cora raised her hands, ash streaking her face. "No, the herbs were for healing. I only wanted to help." "Silence, witch!" Thornfield spat. "You hide your wickedness behind sweet pies and potions, and look at her, stuffed fat with the flesh of children. That is how witches keep their power." The crowd roared in agreement. Rocks struck her arms, one tearing skin. A torch landed near her skirts, the heat searing. Desperate, she turned to flee. "Chase her!" someone screamed. "Don't let her escape." Cora bolted into the dark woods, clutching nothing but her nightdress. Behind her, the only home she had ever built, the bakery she had poured her soul into, collapsed in fire. Laughter and curses followed her into the trees. By dawn, her bare feet were cut and bleeding, her body trembling with exhaustion. At a creek bank, she collapsed to her knees. "Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I have done no evil. Why do they call me cursed?" And then she heard them, the baying of hounds, the thunder of hooves. They were hunting her still. Just as terror swallowed her, a shadow rose from the forest, a towering man, broad as the pines, eyes green and steady as moss. He stepped into the light, bow in hand, and said in a low, certain voice, "You're safe now." Cora blinked through tears and smoke haze, unsure if the giant before her was real. He moved with quiet purpose, kneeling in the frost-damp earth to examine her torn feet. His hands were broad, scarred, yet startlingly gentle as he wrapped her wounds with strips of cloth cut from his own shirt. "I heard the shouts from town," he said, voice deep and steady, carrying no judgment. "And I saw the smoke. They hunted you like an animal." "I'm not what they say I am," Cora whispered, shame rising hot in her throat. "I only bake bread. I make tea from herbs my mother taught me. But they called me a witch." The man's jaw tightened. Men like Thornfield fear what they cannot control. They twist kindness into evil. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I know the difference between poison and healing," Cora Moon Whisper, "and I know a heart too kind to harm." Her lips trembled. "How do you know my name?" "I've bought your bread before," he admitted quietly. "Years back, before I turned my back on town life, I never forgot the taste." He rose then, towering above her, and offered his hand. "Matthias Ironheart, I live deep in these woods. Come, you can't stay here. Their dogs will find you." She hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. He pulled her to her feet with ease, then swept her up in his arms as though she were weightless. For the first time since the mob had driven her out, Cora felt something close to safety. The journey to his cabin was long, the forest dense with shadows. Each time she stirred, Matthias reassured her in that calm, grounding tone. "Almost there. The woods keep my secrets. No mob will dare follow." When they reached it, Cora gasped. The cabin was built from stone and timber, nearly hidden beneath thick pines. Smoke curled from its chimney. Behind it, neat rows of herbs grew in a clearing, each labeled and tended. Matthias carried her inside and laid her near the great hearth, feeding the fire until it blazed. The room glowed warm, lined with shelves of jars and books. A carved wooden cross hung above the mantel, simple but steadfast. "This will be your home for as long as you need it," Matthias said. He brought water to wash her wounds and brewed a tea from wild mint. When he pressed the cup into her hands, his eyes softened. "Drink. Let warmth return to you." Cora stared into the cup, the steam blurring her vision. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "The whole town believes I'm cursed. Aren't you afraid?" He shook his head slowly. "I've seen true evil on battlefields in men's cruelty. You are not it. You are light, an angel wrongly cast down." His voice dropped raw with conviction. "And I won't let them destroy you." For the first time since the flames consumed her bakery, Cora let herself cry, not in terror, but in release. Matthias stayed near, silent, a mountain of strength beside her. Outside, the mob's shouts faded into the distance. Inside, under the watch of the forest guardian, Cora's heart dared to believe that safety, and perhaps something more, might still be possible. The first night in Matthias Ironheart's cabin passed in a blur. Cora drifted in and out of sleep beside the fire, wrapped in quilts that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Each time she startled awake, fearing torches and shouting, she found Matthias nearby, either stirring the fire or quietly whittling wood by lamplight. He never left her alone, but he never crowded her either. By morning, strength had begun to return to her battered body, though her heart still trembled. When she tried to rise, Matthias appeared at once, offering an arm that felt as solid as oak. "You needn't push yourself," he said. "I can't lie here forever," Cora replied softly. "I must learn to stand again." So he steadied her, letting her lean on him as she tested her feet. Every step hurt, but he neither hurried nor pitied her. "One step at a time," he murmured. "That's all any of us can do." Over the following days, Matthias began to lead her gently back into the rhythms of life, though his rhythms were far different from the world she had fled. At dawn, he tended the animals, checked his snares, and split wood. Cora watched from the doorway at first, but soon she joined him, helping to gather herbs or stirring stew in the iron pot. The forest was both strange and comforting. At night, she could hear wolves calling, owls sweeping through the trees, and the river whispering nearby. It should have frightened her, but Matthias was always there, his bow slung across his back, his eyes scanning the trees with a hunter's caution. With him near, the wilderness felt less like danger, more like sanctuary. One crisp morning, he asked her to ride with him into the deeper woods. He saddled his great chestnut horse and lifted her into the saddle before climbing behind. His chest pressed against her back, his arms guiding the reins. At first, Cora's heart raced with nerves, but as the horse carried them between towering pines, she began to relax. "Look there," Matthias said quietly, pointing. A deer and her fawn grazed at the edge of a clearing, unafraid of the man who watched them. "They trust me. They know I won't harm them. The forest accepts those who walk gently." Cora's breath caught at the sight. "It's beautiful." He glanced down at her. "So are you." Heat rushed to her cheeks. She looked away quickly, unsure how to respond. No man had ever said such words to her without cruelty hidden beneath them. Later, when they returned, Matthias set fresh bread cooling on the table, her recipe, though his hands had done the work. "I tried," he admitted a little sheepishly, "but it won't taste like yours." She broke the loaf, steam curling in the air, and smiled for the first time in weeks. "It tastes of kindness. That is more than enough." Evenings became lessons. Cora taught him how to mix teas for fever or how to knead dough until it was soft and pliant. In turn, he showed her how to sharpen a blade, how to set a snare, and how to light a fire even in rain. Their laughter often mingled with the crackle of the hearth. Yet beneath these small joys, shadows lingered. Sometimes Cora woke screaming, reliving the mob's cruel jeers. Each time, Matthias was there, holding her hands gently until her breath steadied. "They will never touch you again," he would vow, voice low and fierce, and sometimes she would catch him staring into the flames, his eyes far away, haunted by memories he never spoke aloud. She longed to ask, but respected the silence that cloaked his grief. The journey was not just into the woods, but into trust. With every step, every shared task, every word spoken and unspoken, Cora and Matthias wove threads of something fragile but strong, something neither dared name yet, but both began to feel. For in the heart of the forest, where no mob could reach, two wounded souls were learning to walk the same path. And somewhere in the spaces between fear and comfort, survival and peace, love was quietly taking root. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm that Cora had never known before. Life in Matthias Ironheart's cabin was simple, but it was also filled with an unexpected tenderness. What began as survival slowly became something deeper, a life shared. Each morning, sunlight filtered through the pine boughs, casting golden streaks across the wooden walls. Cora often woke to the sound of Matthias splitting wood outside, his axe rising and falling with unyielding strength. She would watch from the window for a moment, marveling at the power in his frame, before turning to her own work, sweeping the hearth, kneading dough, or preparing herbs from the garden he had cultivated. The cabin itself reflected Matthias's character, rugged, purposeful, but unexpectedly warm. Shelves lined with jars of dried roots and berries testified to his knowledge of the forest. A heavy table bore the marks of countless meals and years of use. Above the mantel hung not trophies of hunts, but a few simple carvings of animals and plants, crafted with a surprising delicacy for hands so large. Cora began to make small changes. She sewed curtains from scraps of cloth, embroidered with simple patterns of vines and stars. She gathered wildflowers and placed them in jars by the window. Slowly, the cabin began to carry her mark too, not just his. Matthias noticed everything, though he rarely spoke of it. Instead, his care showed in the smallest gestures. He always let her eat first at meals, quietly pushing the larger portion toward her. When her hands grew raw from kneading dough or carrying water, he brought her ointment he had made from pine resin and bear fat. When storms rattled the shutters, he rose to check the roof while she stayed warm by the fire. Cora, in turn, found herself drawn to his quiet acts of kindness. She began to look forward to the way his eyes softened when she laughed, or the rare smile that curved his lips when she teased him over burning a loaf of bread. She learned that he hummed under his breath while sharpening his knives, a tune that sounded like an old hymn, and she realized with a start that his silence was never cold. It was steady, patient, like the earth itself. One evening, after a long day gathering herbs in the forest, Cora returned to find Matthias had made repairs to her shoes, stitching the worn leather with care. "You'll need them for winter," he said simply, handing them back. Her chest tightened. No one had ever tended to her needs so thoughtfully. "You treat me as though I matter," she whispered. His gaze met hers, unwavering. "Because you do." Their closeness deepened in such moments. He taught her to handle a bow, guiding her stance with steady hands on her shoulders. "Breathe with the trees," he murmured as she loosed her first arrow. When it struck the target, she turned in delight to see him smiling, an unguarded expression that stole her breath. In the evenings, she read aloud from the worn books in his collection. His voice was rough when he tried to read with her, stumbling over words, but he listened intently as though every syllable mattered. "Your voice makes the words alive," he once told her. The bond that grew between them was not marked by grand declarations, but by countless small threads. Shared bread, laughter by the hearth, long walks in the woods where silence spoke more than words. Yet both carried shadows. Cora still bore the sting of the mob's cruelty, their accusations, their laughter at her body. At times, she caught herself shrinking, fearful of being too much. But Matthias never once mocked her size. If anything, he seemed to regard her with a reverence that unsettled and comforted her in equal measure. One night, as the firelight flickered across the cabin walls, Cora whispered the thought that had haunted her. "They said I was a monster, a witch, that no man could ever want a woman like me." Matthias set aside his whittling and looked at her, his green eyes fierce and gentle all at once. "They lied. I see you, Cora. Not as they called you, not as they tried to break you. To me, you are—" His voice faltered, then softened. "You are an angel, my angel." Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes. No man had ever spoken such words to her, not without cruelty behind them. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and his steady presence, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The cabin, once only a refuge, had become something else entirely. A sanctuary where trust grew, where wounds healed, and where love, quiet but unstoppable, was beginning to bloom. The forest could shelter them, but it could not silence the world beyond. Word traveled, carried on the lips of traders and hunters who wandered close enough to speak of Salem's Crossing. One evening, Matthias returned from the trading post with a grim look in his eyes. He set down the sack of flour and salt, his shoulders heavy as stone. "They're still speaking of you," he said. "Ezekiel Thornfield stirs the town with his fire. He says the witch survived, that you fled into the forest to consort with demons." Cora's hands trembled as she folded the cloth she had been mending. "They won't rest until I'm ashes." Matthias stepped closer, his voice low and fierce. "They will not touch you again, not while I breathe." But the words couldn't quiet the ache inside her. She thought of the bakery reduced to cinders, of neighbors who once smiled at her pies, now spitting on her name. Even worse were the whispers that haunted her when she lay awake at night. "Maybe I am cursed. Maybe I deserve their hatred." She confessed as much to Matthias by the fire one night. "What if they're right? What if my knowledge of herbs, my bread, my teas, what if it is unnatural?" Matthias's gaze pierced her, sharp and steady. "Cora Moonwhisper, I have seen evil with my own eyes, on battlefields, in the cruelty of men who kill for pleasure. You are not evil. Your gift is to heal, to feed, to give life. Don't let their fear name you." She wanted to believe him, but shame clung stubbornly. It grew worse when she ventured briefly into town weeks later. Wrapped in Matthias's cloak, she kept her head low, but still the whispers rose. "There she is, the witch. She bewitched the giant in the woods, no doubt." A boy threw a stone that struck her shoulder. She gasped, stumbling, but Matthias's hand closed around hers, pulling her back toward the horse. His jaw was a thundercloud, his voice rumbling with restrained rage. "They'll never deserve you," he muttered once they were safe among the trees. Yet even as he vowed protection, his own shadow stirred. That night, Cora found him staring at the carved wooden cross above the mantel, his hands clenched around the edges of the table. "I was a battlefield surgeon," he said finally, his voice raw. "I stitched wounds I could not save. I watched boys die with their prayers still on their lips. I thought I had left death behind when I came to these woods, but it follows, always." Cora moved closer, laying her hand gently on his arm. "You saved me." He looked at her then, his eyes tormented. "What if I cannot save you again when they come?" She shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "Then we will stand together. I am not the frightened woman they stripped and shamed. You've taught me to be stronger, and if Thornfield comes for me, he'll find me standing." As if summoned by her words, signs of the threat soon appeared. One morning, Matthias discovered strange tracks near the herb garden. Boots, not moccasins, a broken branch where someone had lingered too close. That night, as the wind rattled the pines, a voice carried faintly from the distance. "Thornfield's, unmistakable, rising in prayerful fury. Seek out the witch, purge her with holy fire." Cora's blood turned cold. Matthias barred the door, his face carved in grim lines. "They've found the path," he said. "They'll come, and when they do, this cabin will not fall, not while I still stand." Cora's fear warred with resolve. She no longer saw herself as a victim hiding behind Matthias's strength. She had learned the bow, the snares, the herbs. She had found her own voice in his quiet faith. But still, as she lay awake listening to the distant shouts, she knew the storm was coming, and this time it would demand everything they had. His strength, her courage, and the fragile love blooming between them. The night they came was black and brittle, the moon veiled by clouds. The first sound was the baying of hounds, followed by the trample of boots crushing through undergrowth. Torches flared between the trees, wild and hungry. Matthias rose from his chair, towering in the firelight. His voice was calm, though the muscles in his jaw were iron. "Stay behind me." "No," Cora whispered, gripping the bow he had taught her to use. "I will stand with you." A crash sounded outside, the gate splintering. Then the mob surged into the clearing, Ezekiel Thornfield at the front, Bible in one hand, torch in the other. His eyes gleamed with fanatic fire. "There she is," he cried, pointing at Cora, "the witch consorting with the beast of the woods. By God's will, burn them both." Matthias stepped forward, blocking the cabin door, his broad frame casting a shadow over the fire-lit ground. "Take one more step, and you'll never take another," he warned, rifle steady in his grip. The men hesitated, fear flickering at the sight of him. But Thornfield whipped them onward with words sharper than any blade. "Do not falter. She poisoned our children. She bewitched his heart. Purge the evil." The mob surged, and the clearing erupted. Gunfire cracked, arrows hissed. Matthias fought like the very earth had risen to defend its own. Each movement was precise, unstoppable, driving men back with the sheer force of his presence. But he was only one man. The mob pressed hard, circling the cabin. A torch flew through the air, striking the roof with sparks. Cora cried out and loosed an arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the torch-bearer's hand. The man dropped, cursing, his flame dying in the dirt. She stood tall, another arrow notched, her voice steady. "I am not your witch. I am a woman, and I will not burn." The words carried over the chaos, freezing some men in their tracks. Doubt whispered into the cracks of their fury. Thornfield snarled, lifting his torch higher. "Lies! All lies! Only fire can cleanse her!" He lunged forward, torch swinging. Matthias met him head on. The two men clashed, torch against rifle, strength against strength. With a roar, Matthias wrenched the torch away and hurled it into the mud, flame sputtering out. His hand closed on Thornfield's collar, dragging him close. "Look at her!" Matthias thundered, his voice shaking the night. "Do you see evil in her, or do you see the goodness you were too blind to recognize?" The mob wavered. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, and then, from the shadows, came the rustle of wings, the cry of wolves. Shapes emerged, the creatures of the woods, circling, watching. Men dropped their torches in terror. One fled, then another, until only Thornfield remained, gasping in Matthias's grip. Cora stepped forward, bow lowered, but eyes fierce. "Leave," she told him, "and never return. If you claim to serve God, then let him judge me, not you." For the first time, Thornfield's fire faltered. Matthias released him, and he stumbled back into the dark. The clearing fell silent, save for the crackle of the cabin fire. Matthias turned, weary but unbroken, to find Cora still standing tall beside him, her bow in hand, her eyes bright with defiance. They had faced the storm together, and neither had bowed. The mob had melted back into the forest, their torches extinguished, their fury broken. Only the hush of the night remained, stitched with the soft rustle of wind through pine needles. Inside the cabin, Matthias set his rifle aside and sank into the chair by the hearth. His hands, steady in battle, now trembled faintly as the firelight flickered across them. Cora knelt beside him, placing her smaller hand over his. "You stood for me," she whispered. His gaze softened, the hard lines of his face easing. "No, Cora, we stood together. I have fought many battles, but tonight I was not alone." Her throat tightened. She had once been the woman dragged from her home, mocked and stripped of dignity. Yet here she was, alive and unbroken, her strength mirrored in his eyes. The fire crackled, warm against the chill creeping in from the door. Matthias leaned forward, his voice low, as if confessing a secret. "You are safe here. This is your home now, if you'll have it." Tears shimmered in her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak at first. Then, with a trembling smile, she said, "Yes, this is home." They sat together in the glow of the fire, their hands intertwined. Outside, the forest stood watch, a guardian of their fragile peace. Beyond the trees, the world might still call her witch, might still thirst for her ruin, but within these walls she was cherished, and she was free. And though no one could say what storms tomorrow would bring, one truth shone clear. Love had taken root here, deep and unshakable, a flame no mob could ever extinguish. Stories like Cora and Matthias's remind us that sometimes the world calls kindness a curse, and yet love proves to be the truest magic of all. She lost everything, and he gave her a home. He thought he would live alone in the forest, yet she became his angel. Where are you listening from tonight? Do you believe that love can rise even from the ashes of cruelty? Share your thoughts below. And if your heart still believes in second chances, stay with us. The next story is waiting just for you.